Good morning and welcome to our third session of being together and sharing Dharma. In the first 2 days we dealt with the first two of the three principal aspects of the path, and from there we drew the conclusion that of course it's important to situate one's Dharma practice in perspective, in that it has to be geared at addressing the afflicted emotions and their root misperceptions, because that's where the root for suffering lies, and the prospect of happiness, joy, peace, meaningful joy, happiness for oneself, and the prospect of sharing that with others would only come from having addressed those sources of afflictions and roots of sufferings within us, along with cultivating their corresponding positive counterparts. And after having recognized that, then we almost naturally develop a wish to free ourselves from the clutches of these afflictions, to get ourselves off the hook, right? I really like this, off the hook, because that's exactly what we need to. And but then merely having that wish and a sense of caution against that is not enough. One has to then walk the wish by undertaking the practices at all levels of practices geared at addressing these dirts within us that's affecting ourselves and also affecting others. These all should take the form of the three trainings. We should not have any kind of second thought about that. In terms of really bringing Dharma into practice, into play, one has to make sure whether one is fulfilling those three trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. When I say morality, it doesn't necessarily have to sound so sophisticated and so binding and so constraining. It has to start from the simple, practical, of course, kind of a standpoint of countering any elements of harming oneself and harming others. So it has to be rooted in non-harm. And then any kind of practice in line with that, in tune with that, you could build up that affects one's mental, physical, verbal actions, disciplines, whatnot, then that would count for morality. And on that kind of a basis, on that kind of a relative basis, that is suitable to one's own level of capacity, then one has to build on the capacity of concentration to the extent possible. So definitely taking time in cultivating attention capacity is crucial. I mean, even in worldly life, in secular life also, as a student, as a worker, as a manager, whatever, unless we have certain level of that capacity of attention, we won't be able to be productive in whatever endeavors we may be engaged in. And more so is the case with dealing with mind. That is very essential. So shouldn't have any second thought over that either. And then, since, at least from a Buddhist perspective, all these dirts are essentially anchored on the self-grasping attitude. To actually succeed in breaking free from the clutches of afflictions, the dictates of it and whatnot, ultimately the practices should kind of address that Anything falling short of that would definitely be beneficial to a certain extent, but not to the extent of completely freeing oneself from the clutches of affliction. So one would seem like being off the hook, but every once in a while there will be a reminder that not yet, not yet. Like that of the birds, right? Birds with the legs tied to string. That through your repeated practices, the strings could become longer and longer and longer, so that you could fly further and further and further. Almost seems like now I'm free, but then you hit the limit and say, "Oh no, I'm still tired." This is such a powerful metaphor, powerful analogy that I drew from Tsongkhapa's commentary on the fundamental treatise. It's so eye-opening. And then more so is the case with someone who is aspiring to work for the well-being of all sentient beings, seeing that the ultimate way of doing that would be by realizing the full potential of oneself, full Buddha potential of oneself in attaining awakening. For that to be realized, of course, not only generating this wisdom into the ultimate nature of reality is needed, but even that has to be enhanced, has to be developed it has to be a very vibrant and robust, as you say, right? Robust. Do you say robust? Okay, robust wisdom. In the sense that the training should lead one to such an awakening that now nothing. There's nothing left that points to that. Everywhere, every time you open your eyes and engage in everything, you have no choice but to be fully awakened to that reality, and thus be able to deal with the world, go about the world and about the business, yet at the same time with full awakening of that reality. So that's how the strength of such a wisdom can then reach deeper down, not just to the root of the afflictions, but even to the subtle instincts, subtle traces, subtle latencies of them. And that's how then it would unlock the remaining residues of our afflictions, or residues of our limitations, to then realize full awakening. And we have talked about how for that kind of a altruistic attitude, one has to grow in one's heart, expand it to embrace all sentient beings. For that, the need is to cultivate love and compassion. We have dealt with those. Yesterday we used the metaphor of whack-a-mole, right? To make the point that unless and until we have not only understood, okay, let me not complicate it. Unless and until we don't have that wisdom into the ultimate reality, then no matter how seemingly real it may seem, like you have now subdued the afflictions, now these afflictions have been rendered almost what do you call weak and not able to pop up its head when situations arise, when circumstances are ripe, it would still pop up. Well, the reason why I recall this is when you take the whack-a-mole metaphor literally, it would seem like, oh, no other efforts are going to be of any help, because these afflictions are going to pop up as quickly as the whack-a-mole does, but not quite as quickly. That's very important to remember. One has to value all other practice, because this wisdom is not easy to come about. We will see. We will end up disagreeing with what I may have to say or what you may have to think, and often we may end up in disagreement. So that shows how far away we are in even landing onto a harmonized understanding, let alone deepening that and integrating that into a direct perception, right? But we can't afford to wait until then and do nothing in between, because all other practices like love, compassion, generation of the determination, following that, the practice of morality, concentration, etc., would go a long way in really making a difference. In so much so that if one has developed very strong love and compassion with either no inkling of the ultimate reality, or if so, very little, if, or if even more than that, some kind of understanding, but still not yet kind of harmonized within oneself. Even in such circumstances, the force of love and compassion to the action one has developed would have great impact in really undermining the afflictions, in really disciplining them, in really kind of constraining them, keeping them under hold. Like you, and so is the case with concentration practices. The concentration practices to the level of shamatha, vipassana, are said to have effect on our afflictions so much so that it would almost seem like now they are gone. It's like a whole land, or whole of our space land earlier filled with weeds and thorns, thorny bushes and whatnot, have now been completely wiped off, right? Has been almost burned with no traces of any offshoots standing on the ground. So our mind could be fell to have level to that level, to that stage, but with the roots intact down. When rain like this morning comes, it wouldn't take that long for the sprouts to shoot up, and then again, and then again find ourselves tripping on them, and then bumps, whatnot. So yeah, that part needs to be clarified. So as much as whack-a-mole is a good metaphor, but it's not a perfect metaphor, or else we have to invent a whack-a-mole that varies in degrees of the things kind of popping up, right? That is one thing that I wanted to point out. What was the other one? Yeah, I think I thought I had two things, but I have lumped them together regarding the impact of concentration practices, as well as, of course, rooted in the morality practice. Morality defined, inescapably defined by being anchored on non-harm, and the practice of love and compassion. But nonetheless, without this wisdom, they fall short of really reaching out to the root of the afflictions. They could be dealing with them on the surface, or even deeper, but not quite reaching the root and undoing that. That's what I wanted to clarify on. And then here, we kind of made the point that for both of these determinations to be realized, namely determination to attain freedom from the clutches of afflictions, or to attain nirvana, or to break free once forever from the clutches of afflictions, which are all same, synonymous. So to realize this determination, or even further, the determination to attain full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings, both of them cannot do without this wisdom into the ultimate reality. When I keep emphasizing into the ultimate reality, what I'm hinting at, implying, is that there are other wisdoms that one has to work on also. Wisdom into the subtle impermanent nature of things, as well as gross impermanent nature of things, have to be kind of develop them to the point that one has kind of internalized them and what you call grow them to the level of having them upfront in influencing our actions, thoughts, perspectives, whatnot. Likewise, is the same case with the wisdom of seeing the limited nature of how much things can, how much the worldly things can provide. Not that they cannot provide at all, and they provide, and one has all the right to enjoy them, one has all the right to make use of them, but not to be mistaken by their, not to be mistaken by their, pardon? Lure, yeah, by their lure, by their promise of providing everything. They hold up, saying, "This is all you need, then you're all done." That kind of a promise we tend to project on things, and they look like. Very often it happens like, "Oh, if only I could get it, and I won't ask for anything." Once you get it, "Oh, what about the next one?" If we let ourselves be driven like that, there will be no end. There will be no such situation when we will be done with it, right? And keep running at the mercy, at the dictates of these urges, longings within us. Yet at the same time, it is not to completely deny any goodness in things. I mean, they have what they have, and there's every right to kind of utilize them and be even smart in utilizing them for better. Yet at the same time, be warned of kind of the tendency of completely relying on them, kind of banking everything on them. Then when they crash, the entire world crashes, right? One wouldn't have anything inner quality, a lasting inner quality to really bank on and be supported by. So those are other wisdoms that need to be cultivated, but they also don't go far enough in really reaching at the root of the afflictions, except for this wisdom into ultimate reality. But this wisdom into ultimate reality, to gain that wisdom, one has to first nail down what the ultimate reality is and understand it to begin with, and then internalize it, and then integrate it with one's whole being, so that one would be fully functional from that place. But that is not that easy. So that's what we'll be moving into. We kind of slightly did moved into it yesterday. So the slide up here is kind of an inkling to what that this one, yeah, what that ultimate reality might amount to. So these are different ways of approaching it. My best shot at it. There may be one that what I'm presenting may not be the final one. It cannot be the final one. These are just hints, indications. Of course, with best intention, and with all effort in kind of relying them on very authentic scriptures. But at the best, they can be mere pointers. So, in my understanding, what would be the Madhyamaka view, or the ultimate the view of ultimate reality look like? Arriving at an understanding about the mode of existence of all phenomena as free from the true extremes of inherent existence and not existing at all. Oh yeah, okay, you have changed it. Very good. Sometimes in the scriptures itself, it will say free from the extremes of existence and non-existence. That's where I care to kind of explain it, which is there's the danger that one might come out thinking, oh, maybe the middle view means that things neither exist nor not exist. But from Tsongkhapa's point of view, he takes exception to that. But at the same time, there are other schools within Tibetan community, the Tibetan order of Buddhism, who takes that explicit stand. But as far as I am concerned, when I look at them, it's a mere semantics, because they're using different paradigm and different contexts. So should not be too contradictory. Yet at the same time, if you take this paradigm, then thinking of the middle view to be neither existent non-existent would be problematic, but not in the other context. I'm saying this not as a what do you call? Not in a diplomatic way. I'm saying this from my own inquiry into it in my years of teaching at Varanasi, where I got the opportunity in teaching in non-sectarian classes. And when teaching so, I used the texts from all the schools and compared them and then studied them thoroughly. Okay, but still I may be mistaken. Be one, okay? And then the second is, these are, what do you call, approaching the same thing from different angles. Second way of seeing it is the middle view or the ultimate view that we are arriving at, that we are trying to kind of tackle, should amount to, as per the scriptures, literal scriptures rendition, seeing emptiness as reinforcing dependent origination and seeing dependent origination as reinforcing emptiness. So what we understand emptiness should, instead of contradicting dependent origination, instead of being flying in the face of existence per se, it should reinforce existence. So it should be, there should be, not only they are compatible, yet at the same time they should be reinforcing each other. By the way, one thing to remind is when we speak of emptiness, we are not speaking of emptiness of the rabbit's horn. Do you know rabbit's horn? In Tibetan Buddhist scriptures, rabbit's horn is a what do you call? Very popular example for non-existence. But in one of my visits on tour, where was this? In Idaho somewhere? Yeah, jackal. Yeah, jackalopes. That's not real, right? I have to really check again. because the way you are saying jackalope is like that animal is called jackalope. That's not rabbit's horn. So I had to really check whether it's a real animal or not. So on the tour, when the monks were touring and we stopped at some place, might be Idaho, where they had those carts up for sales, somebody spotted it and really got excited. See what has happened, what we thought to be non-existent seemed to be existent here. We should look for rabbit's horn because this jackalope is rabbit unmistakably, but has horn. So what I was saying is that the whole enterprise of establishing things being empty is done on the basis of something dependently relatedly existent. That should be a pointer that, yes, emptiness is not pointing to denying things, rather affirming it, establishing it. That's what Tsongkhapa also very clearly states in one of his defense against objections raised to that. So it is not established on rabbit's horn. It's not established on something that's totally unreal that we think of being real. Rather, it's established, painstakingly established on things that are relatedly existent. That should be an eye pointer that what understanding of emptiness should lead to is not complete denial of things, rather affirming things in their true form. That of being dependently related with no independent existence. Dependently related with no existence in and of itself. Dependently related. Well, I will not push it farther at this point. We will come down and we'll push, and we'll try to push beyond. Okay, then the third one is succeeding in exhaustively. Yes, this pushes the border a little bit. Exhaustively refuting any intrinsic nature while comfortably upholding all conventional realities. Conventional realities are, right? Conventional realities means those which are dependently, relatedly existing, except for their very nature of being lack of any inherent existence. Though even that too is only conventionally existing, except we don't call that conventional reality. I think okay. Mm, well, we will discuss this later on. So, what it means is that it pushes the horizon exhaustively, in that nothing by way of anything objective, nothing by way of anything intrinsic, nothing by way of anything existing in and of itself, even if that be for an iota, for a very, very what do you call sliver part of it, not not a, not a sliver of inherent existence is to be to escape. If one wants to push the understanding to its fullness, then it should come to this form, in that one should be able to posit things being independently related and functional, operational, very comfortably, yet on the basis of having exhaustively ruled out even the slightest sliver of any objective inherent existence. Those those who are familiar with quantum physics, not just familiar, but agrees with it, then you should have a problem with that. Otherwise, that would be difficult to digest, difficult to agree. Okay, so that's the up to this point. I was just just kind of making the point that as much as determination to be free from the shackles of afflictions is important, of course, rooted in first in the appreciation, in the identification, recognition that there lies the root of the sufferings, as well as much as the following entailing practices in tune to that kind of determination is important. Likewise, if one grows further in really embracing all other sentient beings, seeing them in the same boat of suffering and needing support, help, etc., and one develops this smart awakening into choosing one's own full awakening, full attainment, full Buddhahood to be the means by which to alleviate the sufferings, not just of oneself but of others. And then the entailing practices of the six perfections, except for the sixth one, as much as they are important, have great impact in really undermining the ravages, the dictates, the ruins, the harms, hurts of the afflictions as not, whatnot, and then to that extent really promote the prospects of one's happiness, joy, peace in a very truly meaningful way, as well as be a beacon of light to others in really making a true difference in their lives, etc. But unless we have this wisdom, it only falls short of fully realizing those aspirations. One could fly far in one's achievements, but not quite hit that attainment. And based on that, we have then used these slides to point to the fact that the ultimate reality has to be understood in its fullness, and have so far shown this from these few slides here. But then the next few slides will be, we'll be taking a detour. Because of the rain, the road has been blocked for a while. And some constructions are going on, so why not take detour? But detour not completely unconnected with what we had discussed yesterday and the day before, regarding whether this is the only life that we have, this is only one and the final life we have, or are we a continuation? I mean, actually, as being a continuation, there shouldn't be a problem. Everything that is here should be a continuation from before. Otherwise, that would be problematic. What we are talking of continuation is continuation as a personal being. Are we a continuous personal? Are we continuing as a personal identities? In terms of continuation, things will continue from past. There's no question, right? I don't think anyone has any problem, right? This cup may not continue as cups from before, but should continue from before, right? That's just pure physics. I'm just joking. It may or may not be. But what I'm saying is that everything should come from beforehand. Not necessarily in that same form, but in terms of the material, in terms of something going into becoming it. No matter in however ways it does. Maybe so many things coming from so many areas and then coming together and then spreading out, whatever, or continuing in one form or the other. Has to come from somewhere, and we should not be able to point to a point in time and say this is it, nothing beyond that. That would be problematic. I have to first lay the ground, right? No matter what it is, this cup may have been discovered or invented few years back. So suppose that there was nothing by way of cup, although we cannot say for eternity. There might have been a sophisticated world beforehand. It might have gone completely extinct, and then we might be just starting over again. Who knows? Right? We may have very possibly begun with Big Bang, but Big Bang should have come from some bang or small bang or whatever, or unbang, whatever. Yeah. Black hole, that should from somewhere. So that's what I was saying. So in terms of that continuity, it shouldn't be a problem at all. I met, not that I'm criticizing any religion at all, not at all. Particularly what I'm saying is that when we speak of religious tenets and whatnot, we should be very fair and justified in kind of approaching it properly by taking into account its own worldview, its own, paradigm, and then able to account for them. Then pretty much many things will make sense. That's my approach, and I have really seen that. I've really seen that in my own discourses with people. Should I just leave it there? Yeah. So okay, maybe not. Okay. I have made my point. Made my point in saying that when we approach religion and try to say, pick at one point, say, they say this. And we could be doing this from our own Buddhist bias, Buddhist background, and Buddhist paradigm. Then we will definitely find a problem, because it should, because it won't sit in that paradigm. It's not meant for that. But when you shift the paradigm, look at it from their perspective, and then situate it there, I mean, we may or may not agree fully with that, but within the system it will work. It will make sense.
So are you asserting that within a theistic religion, the tenet that a creator God exists fits within that system, but that doesn't mean that it's actually true?
No, but that doesn't mean that it should fit in all paradigms. From a Buddhist, in the Buddhist worldview. But I'm saying that suppose someone has problem believing in beginningless, right? And has really hard time digesting beginningless. Then for them, it would be acceptable, palatable to presume a beginning. So if that's the beginning, then within that system, the law of karma, to a certain extent, may be placed in, but not in fullness. So such assertions as, now the God has become angry, makes perfect sense. Without the backup of a moral system that is, dependent on individuals, what other means would there be for God to train people then at the expense of their own wrath? And that is itself nothing but an indication of compassion, care. So I leave it there. I will leave it there. I will leave it there. So what I meant is, if you take one thing and then put it into another paradigm, it won't fit, and it won't be fair to pick at them from one's perspective. If you want to look at it, then one should look into the whole paradigm, into the whole worldview, and then see. I mean, irrespective of whether or not you agree or you can prove it or not, but within that kind of a framework, it would have its pertinent place there. Yes.
But so in ancient India, there were very many non-Buddhist systems.
Yes.
And within their systems, their different assertions made sense and worked. Mm-hmm. And yet the Buddhists still debated intensely with the non-Buddhists. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did. Because the available worldview and paradigms were not fulfilling all sentient beings. There were many who would not be inspired by that at all. And thus they lack any path for awakening, for improving their prospects. But with change in time, the popularity of it, the wide acceptance of it could shift. Likewise, at this time, this is going to be. I didn't. I was just joking. I had some idea of detour, but this little roundabout joke. Yeah, but I think that would be a fair way of looking at it. But in terms of individuals, professing one particular religion, I mean, not that one would be able to do perfect justice with every of its tenets and whatnot, and one has to kind of start where one is and then proceed further. But in terms of one's efforts, it should be kind of fully geared in understanding it in fullness, so that one would have to the extent possible, one would have a better appreciation of all the different angles, all the different aspects that it is associated with, that it is connected with, by which the understanding would be even greater and fuller. Having said that, if one professes Buddhism, what I think particularly very important is to be very clear that having professed Buddhist practice, one should have no second thought about what it is geared at. It is geared at, in whatever small amount it may happen. It is geared either directly, indirectly, at working against the negative emotions, promoting the positive, negative emotions and negative perspectives, promoting positive emotions and positive perspectives, and thoroughly taming the mind. I'm saying this because Buddha has said this. We have just read it, right? Let me read it again. Where is it? Yes. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So we shouldn't have any second thought about that, or under any pretexts. Oh, it may serve the purpose of my teacher to be angry to someone, to be hateful to someone, to take sides. That's totally off kilter. That's total off kilter. I should rely on catawampas. That is catawampas. So, nonetheless, so yeah, the reason why it triggered me to kind of say, oh, I didn't mean to really criticize one religion or other. Rather, my perspective towards religion is that provided we are faithful in whatever major religion backed up with philosophy we profess, if we could look at it from its full context, then at least in whatever limited ways or not, one would be able to kind of make sense of that and benefit from that. And following that, what I'm bringing up is I once met a rabbi. I met so many of them at interfaith dialogues, and there was one rabbi, and after our panel discussion, someone came up and then asked him, Rabbi, what would we say? Buddhists say beginningless. What would we say? And the rabbi said, it's God, and it is God, 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 all the way. So no beginning. No beginning without God. It's God. We begin with God, and then what about before that? So it's God, 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 all the way. I said that's beginningless. That's beginningless of one kind. Yeah, I had to really lay ground for that too. You saw that's what I was wanted to point out, but I had to really lay the ground. Okay, so earlier with the topic of determination to free ourselves from the shackles of afflictions, as well as striving for full awakening, some of the instructions indicated taking rebirth into consideration, taking the law of karma across lives into consideration, not just the instructions, alluded to them, but the general Buddhist precept, kind of Buddhist position, kind of allows for that. So we need to look at that, right? We can't just leave that elephant in the room, right? Untouched. Let's be brave. Let's speak about it. So, but in how we are going to do this, I'm not going to be too traditional. Saying this text is this text is must be this, must be this, must be this. No. I'm approaching it from the Western physicists and scientists' point of view. What do they have to say? Yes, now. Consciousness. A long time ago, not too long ago, maybe 6 years ago, there was an NPR program called People's Pharmacy. There was on NPR. There was a radio program called People's Pharmacy, and they did an interview of 3 physicians. One of them is Sem Parnia, who is not just a physician but also a PhD in cellular biology. I think they call him. You are a hardcore or solid scientist, something like that. So the interview was very, very interesting. They tackled the question of consciousness with 3. I really got attracted by it. So much so that I approached the radio host and asked for permission to translate it into Tibetan, which they approached the interviewees themselves, and I got permission, except the translation is not quite out. I have translated one of them, of the 3 phases, of the 3 interviews. I've translated one of them. I'm now going to post it on Facebook, and then do it later again, and then build that material. So it's very interesting to see how even within the scientific community there is 2 opinion. And of course, opinion not just held by easygoing low-level scientists, but really hardcore scientists who have some 40, 50 years of pure science activity background. So I want to present not that I'm doing it exhaustively, because otherwise, because that's not the main theme of the presentation here, but kind of doing it briefly. Yeah. So he says the problem of consciousness. He says this is what is called the problem of consciousness. Right now in science, thankfully, there are some scientists like myself who are interested in trying to pursue the answers, as the answers don't yet exist. So it is not a completely solved issue at all in the science. So that's very important to understand. Very often, people outside the scientific community seem to have that kind of a naive impression that, oh, given their stand, which is a hypothesis at the best, that mind is an emergent property of the brain, and that when brain ceases to function, mind should cease to function. Should cease to function. It ceases to function, but it should cease to function because of the hypothesis. And it is working hypothesis in that so long as we are alive and deal with it, deal the experiments and based on that kind of a hypothesis, it seems to work. But in other circumstances, it doesn't. Whereas he says that there is enough evidence that warrants a large scale in study. And I have been trying to really catch up with his study, because he has started a study called Aware, where he's supposed to really use scientific methods in seeing whether there are out-of-body experiences that people claim, by maybe placing something that could be seen only from above, not by anyone around, particularly not someone who is lying on their bed, on their back, on their bed, right, in the operation system or operation theater, and then see if they happen to come back into life and be able to say, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this, which could be only possible if they had gone out of body like that. But I haven't since heard.
If you look on Google Scholar, for example, outer body experiences, they have some, but it's not a lot of people. There's a few people that saw that. I remember that study that you're referring to.
Uh-huh.
There's some people that saw those things from a different vantage point.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's there.
I have no question about such incidences, but the question is whether they are backed up by modern scientific researchers or not. In terms of the instances, there are a lot from time immemorial. Earlier it was thought that, that would be only possible in countries like India and others where they have this culture or belief in it. But no, they found it. They shifted their focus, findings in the West, and they found as many cases. Except people in the mainstream science are raising their finger at the integrity of the scientific background after them. So that's what he was after, kind of really trying to do top-notch scientific research into that. Yes.
He has a book out. It's called Erasing Death. It is from.
Oh yeah, Sempania. But how new is this?
It's pretty new because it updated with New Aware Study.
Okay, New Aware Study. So good. Now I can go back with with something new from here. So yeah, in terms of now what they're trying to do is trying to really pursue it in the spirit of hardcore science to the extent possible. I mean, given the subject matter being so evasive. Yes, and that's his, at that point, that he was saying, our assumptions that human mind, consciousness, and the brain are the same thing, they work for the majority of cases. In the same way nowadays, if we use Newton physics for most things on planet Earth that we are involved with, that's fine. We don't have to apply quantum laws. They work fine. It's only when you go to that extreme that those laws no longer hold. So is the case with, so long as we are embodied being, and then kind of basing our findings on that hypothesis seem to kind of align. But in certain extreme cases, then there's this question raised. And from a Buddhist perspective, that's totally fine, because once we are embodied in this corporeal being as we are, I mean, consciousness is at the level of consciousness that we are working, which is very gross consciousness, it has no other way but to be intertwined with the body. There's no question at all. It's only when the mind kind of dissolves in a way, or kind of comes down into the subtler way. The subtler it gets, the less contingent, the less dependent it is on the gross consciousness, gross body. So that's where these questions will be pertinent as to what the fundamental connection or relationship between body and mind might be. If we just, confine our researches on gross consciousness, the connection will always be found. Even given that also, one question that could be raised is whether this relationship between body and mind, or brain and mind, is one way or both ways. As we say, is it a downward causation or upward causation, or a same level causation? There's still no clear answer, right? As far as I know, but I would be really happy if people could chip in.
I also had similar discussion actually, and the starfish and jellyfish, they all don't have a brain, but still conscious, still conscious beings. And then also, there's many humans that have been without brains,
Human beings?
Yeah.
I see. You mean those cases of what is called? Yeah, the brain, water brain. What do you call that? Encephaly. Yes, and then yes. But yeah, those are what do you call extreme cases that needs to be looked into. Yeah, I remember making a presentation at one of the Mind and Life conferences, where I touched upon those by bringing up those cases. Okay. I mean, in a few years back, we had this case of a Harvard University professor, as I think a neuroscientist by the name of Alexander Evan something, who himself was a hardcore scientist towing the standard scientist, neuroscientist line, saying mind has got to be an emergent property of brain. With no brain, never mind. Actually, you laughed at this expression. No. I brought this up. There was a consciousness expert in that same Mind and Life conference who presented his part, and he said, "No brain, never mind." He meant that no brain, there can never be mind. I said, "This works for me also." I told him in my following presentation, "No brain, never mind. Don't worry, there's still mind." Yeah, that was a big laughter for everyone. But I was wondering why you laughed at the first instance of this, when this was first mentioned here. Yeah, so at that time, I said, this statement of yours doesn't point to your position. It is as good for my position. I said, "No brain, never mind. There's still mind there. Don't worry." Okay. So, yes. So, yeah, there's this professor from Harvard University who was what you call towing the hardcore mainstream scientific neuroscientist path, saying brain has got to be there for there to be mind. But then he himself underwent coma for, I think, for a week or something. Then when he came back, he's a changed person. He changed his position, saying not that he left his profession. He didn't leave his profession. That was a very well-paying profession. How would he leave it? But he is now a changed person in terms of the relationship in body and mind. He said, no, I have myself experienced something that wouldn't have been possible if that were the case. Now, how would I deny what I have experienced?
And what was specific about his case was the kind of situation that got him into this coma. He had all the knowledge about how the brain worked.
Okay.
And he had a kind of coma that took out his cerebral cortex. So he shouldn't be able to think in a certain way that we associate with that part of the brain.
Exactly.
It should be impossible. But he recovered from this thing that most people die from, and then he had this background.
Yes.
So he was able to look at his experience of what his thought was like, what his mind was capable of doing during that time. It wouldn't be possible by our understanding of neuroscience. That was what was unique about his case, because a lot of people go into comas, but they go in for different reasons.
Yeah. So with his background, he was pretty clear that by the standard scientific position, this shouldn't have been possible. Yeah. Thanks for kind of filling in the detail. And this is quite interesting. What he's pointing to, right? It's kind of comparing it with an actual example of what happened with physics, right? With Newtonian physics being fine, perfectly fine at the macro level systems, but not quite functional at the micro level physics, and how yet at the same time how the two are very linked together, and how the behavior is very different at those two levels, and that could be very true with mind also. Which is to say that so long as it is embodied in this gross body, I mean, this hypothesis may fully work, or except for very, very remote, rare circumstances. But in rare cases, and particularly in the cases of outer body experiences and whatnot, so long as we can assert the authenticity of them, because there are so many made-up stories also. Some make up these stories, like from hypnosis and kind of influencing their children in really insisting, did you see this? Did you see this? Isn't this called this? Something, and then they influence them, and from young age, and then make them seem like recalling something, etc., etc. So there have been many such cases. I mean, people do so many different things for who knows what reason. So there's this need of really, from a scientific point of view, from this being true to the scientific spirit, have to be kind of doing it very properly, right? So that's what he was. He announced in that interview that he was going to do, and I was really curious, and I did Google and look for his following things, but I could not find.
Managed to read the whole thing. It's not the best written book, but it's really very interesting. But what's also interesting about it is they don't have the conceptual framework for explaining a lot of the things. Like it would be helpful if they had the background that we have in philosophy and understanding self and all these kind of things, because even their language about it, they're just back and forth because they don't have a conceptual framework to hold it in. But they did that study, and they did it in different, I think it was England and the US, in emergency rooms. And the problem is that it's hard to get enough numbers. They didn't have a huge number of people that happened to, that they had all the equipment there,
Yes.
blah, blah, blah. But so it's a very, very interesting book. It's really compelling if you believe the way a Buddhist believes, that you can find things that really support this worldview. But the philosophy in it is all over the board in terms of how he's making sense of it all.
Yeah, the whole point here in making the case here is partly it's the elephant in the room. If we don't touch, then it wouldn't be fair. But at the same time, It's just saying that, see, it is not so clear which way, and thus at least be smart in giving the benefit of the doubt for it, and then invest some in that insurance. So they won't create, yeah, do open an account in that insurance. That's what I meant. That could come handy. Don't just merely shoot everything within this life, and then by the time we say goodbye, we even say goodbye to just about everything, and then start over. Start all over again with zero account. That's what I'm saying. That I'm saying. Because after all, when we go about our life, we are on our own. We're together here, but no, we can't be together all the time. And sometimes we think that, oh, somebody is born and that really belongs to the parents, whatnot. But of course, in terms of the body, that completely belongs to the body, belongs to the parents. Not every children think like that. They say, this is my body. No, this is totally borrowed body. It's somebody else that you're calling yours. But from a Buddhist perspective, your mind is yours. And that's what really matters. And in that sense, you are an individual with your own baggages with you, and you have to deal with it. So it would be better off to have, if that is the case, to have something already in the account to then use up and then build on, rather than having to spend the whole life first quarter of it in kind of putting in few coins and then building up later on. And then once again, completely exhausting it and then starting over, no end. Rather make the progress, which each life kind of climb up the ladder and then say, hooray, I'm off the hook. Now these are near-death experiences. These are from quotations from Dr. Melvin Morse, who was one of those interviewees. He was such a character. His way of telling the story was so attractive, so appealing. He himself had struggled with this topic for 20 years, he says, but he, with his background in medical science, with clear idea of what that means, what not, he's saying he was working with children, resuscitating them into life. And he says, in his case, usually the average number is 20%, but he says 100%. In his case, 100% children that he has resuscitated came back with stories. And these are the quotations from those. There was one guy whom he had resuscitated back into life, and for a while it was in the operations theater, and they didn't have somehow they had the crash card plug taken out, and they thought that it was plugged in. They tried to use it; it could not work for a while. This guy was seeing this all from above. When he was sucked in, when he was brought into life, and he said, "Oh, your crash card wasn't plugged in. When I was floating on the sail, I looked down and I saw that it wasn't plugged in at all, and that's why you guys were having trouble getting to work." What? That's his quote. And then and then I was back. This was another young girl. And then I was back. She told her story of how she saw heaven, etc. Right? And any afterlife scenes that they would explain from their own belief, from their own culture. I mean, the core sites, the core experiences are the same, except people differ in how they explain it. So she was explaining it from her own Catholic upbringing, saying, "Oh, I saw heaven, there was this and this and this." And Dr. Melvin was just listening to him. It was very apparent on his face that he wasn't believing it. And then then I was back. And he would ask, "What do you mean you were back?" That's what I have been trying to figure out also. This is from a small girl. And then this was by another person. That was weird. You guys sucked me back into my body. So he was explaining his own earlier experiences out of body, and then he said, "Oh, that was so weird that he was telling that they have." He was telling the boy that they had saved his life. He was saying, "No, no, no! You didn't save me. You didn't have to save me. I was alive, except you sucked me into the body." So they wouldn't say that you. Yes, please.
I'm just wondering how a mental consciousness saw like a visible object. Is that like a direct yogic perceiver?
I see. Yeah, so that's what we mean by gross consciousnesses depend on gross bodily basis, but not subtle consciousnesses. Subtle consciousnesses can see, but not necessarily through an eye. Pardon? Yeah, it would be very similar to Bhato. That this could be a Bhato state, if at all it is an actual death.
Once in one of the early Mind and Life conferences,
Yes.
they were talking about near-death experiences, and His Holiness said that once the mind leaves the body, it cannot come back. Once somebody enters the bardo, they cannot come back.
Mm-hmm. I see.
Yeah, I was just reading Holiness saying in the book Sleeping, Dreaming, Dying.
Uh-huh.
He was mentioning this dream yoga, and or one can use this prana, vital energy, and then also consciousness, and then sort of leave the body and go elsewhere, and then sort of come back. Maybe that relates. Oh,
Yeah, but that's not Bhato.
oh, different. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, as much as we are seeing some contradiction here, one alert that I may make is what the Western science considers clinical death is not even death for us. It is out of the 8 processes to actual death, it is halfway through. One still have, supposing the journey is 100 miles, one still has 50 miles to go. It's not yet dead. So stopping breath, breathing, brain function, stopping, heart beating, stopping, the 3 combined is the best criteria for death in medical science. But that's just halfway through the process of death. And the remaining 3 is dealing with very subtle mind. So it is very understandable that subtle as it is not dependent on the gross body. So it would look like a death from a clinical point of view, but not quite death from a scientific, from a Buddhist point of view, and as capable of seeing things and being conscious. So it may not be a Bharto state per se, supposing that once you enter Bharto, you can't enter back, then it is definitely there within that 4 remaining stages of death. It's very interesting if we piece this together, right? Now, in the case of dream yoga and other yogas, it's through one's own, conscious effort that one can go out and come back. That's not, because the people do that without having died. So that wouldn't be Bharto like that. Okay, but yeah, I have to check. I have to really keep this in mind that if once they enter into Bharto, maybe it is I think that's very true, because once you enter into Bharto, you can, because the reason is, the reason is, once the Bharto has set on, you have ceased the connection with the body. Not only that, you have already started a new life, new karma vision already started. So it belongs to the next life. We think that we start our journey by being born in this life, but from a Buddhist perspective, we start before that. Before that, in the Bharto. Our Bharto as this being, our Bharto to this life precedes our birth. Then when that Bharto dies, when that intermediate death happens, then we are born, then we die. With our death, our one specific karmic vision ceases. And then with the onset of the next Bharto, new karmic vision starts. So it's very Yeah, very logical also, very consistent with the general framework also. So that's, thank you. Yeah.
I understand the concept of Bardo, but I was curious if it was, I guess, already a Tibetan word, or if Bardo is the translation.
I see. Parto is a Tibetan word.
And what does it
Yeah.
more roughly translate?
Par is intermediate. Parto means intermediate state. Yeah, intermediate in the sense of between actual birth, actual birth as we understand, and the previous death. Whereas in actuality, it is the onset, the first phase of the next, birth.
There's more than just only this one intermediate bardo, though, right?
Yes. That's very true. Particularly in Nyingma Kagyu presentations, they explain the entire cycle of being into different partos. So those are partos in the sense that each one of them comes between two different stages, but that is not the parto. This is not the sipe parto, not the parto that we speak of between death and the next birth. But that's a way of categorizing different phases of entire existence into different 6 partos. Yeah, like that. Yes. Yeah, out of that, there is one parto that I really have no clue. I have to really study. But yeah, that's a way of classifying the entire stages of one's life, including death, into a comprehensive picture, out of which Sipe Parto is the one that we are talking of. Yes, could be. Okay, this one. Yeah, this out of all the many quotations, this really sticks out. By the way, Jim Tucker is still living, if I'm not mistaken, and he used to be the student of Ian Stevenson. He and Bruce Grayson. He was not among the 3 interviewees on that radio show. Bruce Grayson was. I'm quoting him also. But his comment that came out in New York Times some years ago, it's really interesting because he, along with Bruce Grayson, were continuing the work of Ian Stevenson. They have a very strong base in Virginia University from the fund that Ian Stevenson first started to get, because of which then he could go and send people himself go to places where there were instances of people recalling past life and whatnot. And they eventually kind of redirected their exploration experiments into the West. After some feedbacks they got pointed to maybe cultural influences are there. Then they went into the West. They saw as many cases. So, after Ian Stevenson, Jim Tucker and Bruce Grayson, they are continuing their work. And Jim Tucker, in one of the New York Times interviews, I came across this. I was really stuck. I mean, he really stands out in claiming something continuing beyond this life. This is interesting. See, there can be something that survives after the death of the brain and the death of the body that is somehow connected to a new child. I have become convinced, and this is very untypical of scientists, right? I'm convinced that there is more to the world than the physical universe. There is the mind piece, which is its own entity. What stronger statement could we expect? Yes, can we move on? Yeah. So this is Bruce Grayson, this another colleague of him, but he doesn't come out as strongly because one time he was in Dharamsala and they had a conference on consciousness. He was asked about this because someone in the panel thought that this quote that I quoted earlier was from him, but it wasn't. So he wasn't that forthcoming, but he has this to say, at least from his researches. I think at this point it is enough for us to be humble and say we don't have all the answers we thought we did, and that the world is much more bizarre. I really like this. The world is much more bizarre than we can imagine. We can even imagine. We could replace the word bizarre by bazaar. The world is much more bizarre than we think we can even imagine. Not just some limited things there, but much more bizarre. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I think that should do. But one thing very interesting about this interview is that on and off, as I said earlier, I didn't really mean to take the time in kind of expanding on this, so I just included just a little bit. But what is very telling about this interview in particular is that it really, the interviewers raises the usual mainstream objections. Like, oh, whether is this an hallucination, or isn't this a case of lack of oxygen, or is this the work of drugs, etc., etc. And they were answering each one of them from their own scientific understanding, findings. And one thing very interesting that they brought up is that when people come out, they become complete changed person. The transformation that goes so deep and sustained, they would track them retrospectively and prospectively, and then keep the records. And they have seen one thing very striking is that the transformation. And they said that hallucination cannot work like this. And then they have things to say, similar things to say about whether it is oximetry. Okay, maybe I'm not saying right, but it is a case of lack of oxygen, or drugs, etc. So that was interesting. Pardon? Oh, transformation in the sense that they become much more compassionate, less attached to life, more serving. But because they have seen life being much more bizarre than they are used to. And they say that they do not anymore identify themselves with this embodied being. They say that more than that. And their life is much more than what we think. So they transform into positive behaviors. There was one in particular who was a drug mafia guy, who was the go-between guy, transporting things and whatnot, and would be completely okay with killing someone, knocking down someone, knocking up someone, knocking up someone, would have no second thought at all. But now he's a completely changed person. So, etc., etc. Well, how are we doing? Oh yeah. Oh, we still have. Okay, I keep thinking 10:30 is the time. Okay, so that was the detour. That was the detour. It was quite fun, colorful. It almost looked like a fall drive. Different colors, like a burning tree there with the red, right, and the yellow. Whoa! It was. I remember going with Bob, my host in Knoxville, Tennessee. He is an exterior designer, and he would always make sure that I get to ride with him during the fall season when there is leaves changing. So I had a similar experience right now with Is it already fall? We had the leaves fall. Okay. So yes, please. So now we are entering into the hardcore topic, Madhyamaka, right? Many of these slides I have shown before, but since there are many new, and then one thing very important about Madhyamaka philosophy is it can't be. One cannot be done with just one time exposure to it. Like I have heard in Western universities, in some universities, at least in the case of one professor that I know of teaching physics, she remembers having had her quantum mechanics, quantum physics class repeated. That was the requirement. If you take quantum physics course this year, you must take next time the same course. I think that means Madhyamaka should be, of course, one should repeat it twice or thrice. I myself spent 3 years in figuring out. The first 2 years maybe, or even the whole of the 3 years, I was saying, what is the teacher speaking of? What is wrong with the world? What he is pointing is not there, is not even seen as being there. I said, what is wrong? What is he pointing at? Being not there, that we keep being implied to be seeing as being there. I said, no, I don't see anything that's not there. I see perfectly okay. It took that long for me to really realize what he is pointing at. It shows, at least it may not be the case with you, but with me, the cloud is so thick. The cloud is so thick. It took so long to kind of finally see what is behind it. Finally see a little bit. Now I at least makes some sense. Like, yes, there's something strange and mysterious and of course weird and bizarre and bizarre about things around. Like particularly when I look outside my window, outside my office window, and I see the tree. The tree is so huge, big, you can't deny it. But where's the tree? Where's that big tree? You have a hard time really locating it. It is there, but not there. Wow. And then when I apply this, as hard as it is, to myself, saying, oh, you have this core sense of I am important, I need to be taken care of, I am this and this and this. I say, where is this I? This I is not even, if I use the term, the terms may be a little troubling, but this I is not even existing from. It is existing where the body is, but not from the body. Let alone from the body, not even from outside. It is there. When we talk about the cups being not what they are, what not, we're not saying the cup is not where the cup is. The cup is there, actually it is not from there. If it is not from there, then where could it be from? From here, from the subjective point of view. So everything turns out to be from the subjective point of view, not from their objective point of view. Very difficult. It's difficult. But when I apply it to myself, it's so relieving. Oh, this is who you are. Not that important to be really clinging to, kind of really feel the effect of kind of loosening up and feeling little fresh, little free, not uptight. So yeah. So there's no harm in repeating it if they are doing that with quantum physics. If not more, we can do it. We have every reason to ask for grant and say we want to repeat this. Okay. But as hard as it is, even Buddha understood that. And he planned it out. You know, after he became enlightened, he kept quiet for 7 weeks. Who is going to understand what I'm going to say, what I'm going to share? Instead, they might put the blame back to me and think that I am mad. Who in the world will understand me? What I have understood and experienced as being profound insight, profound awakening. Who am I going to share with? Who is going to understand me? But his compassion didn't leave him there. Compassion was pushing him. So he had to figure out a way. Not that it should be a problem with Buddhas to figure out a way, but he kind of took time in figuring out how to present it. And he presents it in these different steps. First, he didn't begin pointing at our faults, saying, "Oh, you all are seeing things wrong." He didn't say that. He said, "I'm fine with how you see it, except bring these gadgets, new gadgets, and this will help you." He didn't touch. He didn't meddle with whatever our base is. Rather, he says, "Okay, see the sufferings as suffering, and look at the afflictions as the cause of the sufferings. And since the suffering, the causes of the sufferings can be dealt with, not necessarily pointing at the very, very, very subtle roots of them by way of grasping the inherent existence, but kind of assuaged it. And then say, okay, now do this eightfold path. Practice this. And this will help." So he kind of kept intact our assertion of things being reducible to their building blocks. Like there should be outside world, objective outside world there, out of which everything may be coming, everything may go in, but it is out there, intact. Like reducible. This is basically the materialism, right? Reducible to their building blocks, be it consciousness, be it material things. They are reducible to their indivisible starting point, reference point, building blocks, and from there it grows. That's how world outside there, including ourselves, comes about. And then the next one says, no. At another occasion, he says, this previous one, he didn't explicitly say, okay, of course, on certain occasions later on, after he became enlightened, he did allude to things being the way you see it. And then based on that, then he would teach other teachings. Likewise, during the first very Dharma will teaching, the Four Noble Truths teaching, he laid out the mechanism of the Four Noble Truths, but didn't go deep into this, nor did he point at the finger saying, this is where things are wrong. And then at other occasions, he even alluded to, when he was responding to people on different occasions, he was alluding to their being self. And then moved from there in teaching the Dharma. On another occasion, he said, he sounded very different. He said, no, things are merely mind. This is very strongly idealist. Not as, from my readings of the Western philosophy, particularly Western idealism, this Madhyamaka, this mind-only system, mind-only philosophy that Buddha brings out, doesn't look as radically idealist. Although among the Tibetan Buddhist interpreters, they will differ. Some would go to that extent, saying what it is saying is that there's nothing but the mind. Everything is mind, right? Except that's a mere projection. It's almost like it's a mere projection. It is a mere extension of the mind, and when you withdrew the mind, everything will be withdrawn with it. Nothing will be outside of it. That's one extreme way of explaining it, and that's at least in my understanding, very much in line with what Western idealism seem to point to. Eventually, kind of withdrawable into the God's mind. Nothing but that. Or in the case of individuals, one's own projections. But in some other interpretation, it doesn't go that far. Doesn't say doesn't go that far as to say that there is nothing by way of materiality. That's how extreme it can go. There's nothing by way of materiality. Whereas the interpretation of the Chittamatra that I'm associated with doesn't go that far. It says that not that there is no material. There is material things there, they have its own unique functions, whatnot. But ultimately, they are the substance of the mind. Not that they are active projection of it right then and there to be readily withdrawable as such, but ultimately they are mental substances. Mental substances expressing into real materiality. So anyway, what it says is that in a way it is working. It is helpful to working against our afflictions. Before we move into the more sophisticated philosophy, if we could at least take a moment and then question the existence of things, and then think, oh, maybe to a great extent it's my mind that's making things up. That there is not that concrete things to blame it. Rather, it's my perspective, my way of looking at it, and from that they kind of then build the philosophy into a comprehensive one, saying, "Oh, everything is mind projection, nothing like that." Yes, it says nothing has external reality, and external in the sense that external to the mind. But if you push it too hard, it will say not that there is nothing external there. There's nothing by way of matter. Everything is mind, except we are confused. And then this will make a good segue into the Madhyamaka. Actually, we have already started from there. And then we'll also try to make sense of why these different philosophies, which on the surface look contradictory, how to going to look at them. Why? How would it be? How would it be sensible to be coming from a Buddha who would have nothing to lose, nothing to gain, and who would be only concerned with the well-being of others?